What should you be getting from an asset survey, and why aren't you getting it? First thing I want to say is asset surveys are more about the planning than technology. People will push the technology like no tomorrow. Get it on this, get it on this. But if people cannot manage to write what they need on this, you're getting garbage in this as well. The reality here is a lot of people that survey cannot survey. They're cheap labour in many sense, but in other ways they're very expensive. What I mean is you're paying a lot for them, but you may find your contractor isn't. As such, the quality is pretty poor often. They may confuse items from being a boiler to being a compressor tank. There's strange things that people get up to, and this is why it's important to hire experienced people. But I want to run down what you should be expecting and should be asking for. First thing is you've got to be looking for a extensive asset list. Now, before you even think of getting somebody to start collating your asset list, check your CAFM system is capable of using it. Many of the things I've come across over the years, they've gone, thanks very much, there's the asset list, and then they've taken it to their software guys that go, but we can't put that in the CAFM. And that's it. It's a waste of time. They've got it on paper, but cannot do anything with it. They've got it on a spreadsheet, but cannot do much with it. The CAFM system needs to be capable. There is some CAFM software I can recommend, but either email me privately or just get in touch and we'll discuss that. There's a lot of stuff out there that's overpriced. That's why I recommend having a chat with us. So you've got to look at where you're going to be putting it when it comes out. Is your system capable of it? Is it capable of breaking things down? For example, can it just say that you've got a air handler unit, but it cannot understand things like actuators? As such, where you would normally go, we have a AHU1, and this is the equipment attached. It could be pumps or anything attached to it, or distribution systems. The point is, if it can only do the hierarchy of AHU1, all this stuff needs to be either done independently and maybe a comment system added somewhere to identify what's attached to, or simply you need to look at your CAFM system before investing in your asset list. So as you can see, the structure is very, very important, because you need to work this out before you even get a surveyor in, because you need to identify what assets you want. I know most people do not have any idea what assets they want, and rely on the asset surveyors to do it, which is where we constantly get in this cycle, well, the asset survey was a waste of time. No, it wasn't. You need to be more hands-on with it. The next thing is what equipment to gather. This needs to be done and set in stone. There is no point getting somebody to collect all your fire alarm systems, etc., and then you go 3 weeks later, can you do all the fire hydrants and all your hose reels when you didn't add them in the first place? Because the first thing you've got is you broke them out of their cycle, because they're already working their way through the building in a methodical manner, and sending them back to part one and going through to make sure they haven't missed any fire hydrants, etc. You want to add that as an extra at the end, but get that bit of asset list finished, building finished, and at the same time collate a list of the assets you want to add. You just want to build a list up and say, right, now you've finished it, you finished the building, this is the revision, I want these added as well. In the same way, removing things, I recommend not removing anything until the asset list is actually finished. And the reason being is that it can end up with bits being taken out that shouldn't be, depending who's doing the editing. A lot of people will outsource this to cheaper labour. My personal view is a surveyor should be the one that does all their work. But what happens is you get the guys with the gadgets going, that's expensive, I'll get my sister or my mother to sit and do the paperwork, just send it to me. In the same way, you get them to say, scan this in, send it over to us. They then get their mother or sister, whatever, and then they look at it and can't read your handwriting, but they don't know what some of these abbreviations are anyway, because they've got no knowledge of HVAC or general facilities equipment. So as such, you get a lot of errors. My personal view, if I wrote it, I should input it. Simple as that. Doesn't matter if it's on this or on paper. Doesn't matter. Whatever way it ends up in the system before it's data loaded, it should be completed by the surveyor. On top of that, so we've gone through that you shouldn't interrupt a survey once it's started, because this is where a lot of problems come in, because you get the problems between different surveyors understanding it differently. You get the fact that the continuity is broken. You get the fact that some people are going back to the start and doing it all over again. You get a lot of wasted money. You get a unreliable data source. But then you've got the fact you need to identify at day one exactly what you want collecting. When people say collect the valves, this is a very simple task. What is a valve? This is just one example. Some people, if they're told to collect valves, will write on their spreadsheet or data input of any source, valve. Writing that does not tell you anything. Is it a gate valve? Is it a shut-off valve? Is it a gas valve? Is it a mains gas valve? Is it a sub-valve? You need to have it broken down. Just counting the valves will not help you on your asset list. When you get that into the CAFM, you could have 800 valves and not one bit of information of any use. My personal view on it, if you want to get the valves in there, get them identified. But make it simple as well. Get yourself some photographs, get somebody to wander around for an hour and photograph the different types on site. Most sites could be replicated, because you'll find like the lights are the same on every single floor. You may have 10 varieties of light, but there is only 10. You will find that the fire doors are all the same. You will find that the valves are all the same. They've got different varieties, but they still have the same type. A gate valve is a gate valve. The sub-meter is a sub-meter. Your shut-off valves will all be the same. They've got different sizes, diameters, etc. But the whole thing as a valve you can identify. If you've got a good setup with your engineers, you should actually have them all tagged and identified anyway. So do you need them surveyed? Do you already have a record of them somewhere, which A, could either speed up the survey because you could give it to the surveyor and they just go around and can simply tick that it's there and its condition, or are you going in blind, which means you're probably not going to find maybe 30% of them, because they'll be tucked in somewhere up above the AHU, tucked in behind some boiler somewhere. So you've got to bear these sort of things in mind, but also, what do you want the information for? There was a site I done last year relating to fire shutters. They'd never been tested, and as such they were cable tied shut and all sorts. Cable tied open, completely illegal, but they had never been on an asset list before. So there are assets that you may think, okay, well, I don't know, we got those. Put them in that if they come across them, they mark them down. If they're compliance, if they're known to have a maintenance regime, or the surveyor thinks they should be added. That's the three main elements you're looking for. And obviously, for the asset list itself, you're looking for what you wanted collected in the first place, but those other three are the other ones you want to say, look, if you think it should be added, add it on there, photograph it, identify it. Which brings me on to photographs. Should you photograph every item? I don't think so. For lighting, unless there's a reason for a specific light to be identified, I wouldn't bother. I would identify each type. I'd rather take one light fitting down, strip it down, and look at its ballast and all the other bits attached to it, so you actually have an asset with all the information, all the equipment's attached to it, everything that builds it up, makes it, and then you add that as your primary identification, so that every light that looks like this is light A. And then even for the surveyor, they could just put light A, because they can edit that later, because they know what light A is this type. In the same way they do it with the other lights, and build up a picture of the different types of lights on site, and it's a lot more in depth than a picture of a light that looks the same as every other light they took a picture of on a floor. Larger plant I recommend taking pictures of. Things I don't think are in good condition or may be a potential risk. And something that nobody seems to really cover too much these days, or haven't really covered at all, is environment. If your boiler house is leaking steam and you've got electrical equipment in there, the life cycle and everything in there is being affected by the steam that is making that room horrible to work in, dangerous to work in some cases, but ultimately the environment is having a detrimental effect on all the equipment in there. So environment I do recommend adding if people think it's necessary. I mean, if I walk in a plant room and it's the same as every other plant room with no problems, then it doesn't really need to be identified. Maybe a little tick box just to say it's safe, it's in good condition, etc. Life cycle is another thing that is sort of brought into the asset list these days. The life cycle is normally set on the SFG 20, and I would say that getting a accurate life cycle is pretty difficult. The reason being, for most asset surveying companies, they don't have the relevant equations to work it out. They also cannot prove the accuracy. For example, if I took let's go back to an AHU, and I have no idea how often it's been serviced. Although they sign it off as being serviced, I do not know that they've been servicing it properly. Its life cycle may have been reduced. How do I know? I can look at it, I can agree, I can get in there and have a look at it, but in most cases you will find that there is not enough budget for you to get into every AHU. So you have to bear that in mind, that a life cycle is basically a snapshot of what it could be. It could be less, it could be more, depending on its environment, depending on its runtime, depending on its condition, depending on its maintenance regime, depending on any part replacement. Was it replaced like for like, or have you put something cheaper in there? All these things affect the actual overall piece of equipment. So you have to analyse those things and think, is it right? You can take this SFG 20 and that will give you a guide. But ideally, you want to go, okay, is it worth having a look myself? Just to see how I feel about it. Because if somebody says, oh, it's due to come out in the next 2 years, go and have a look. It may be fine. It's like with lifts. You can have two lifts at the front of house that you already changed 2 years ago, and you can have a lift at the back that's only used once in a blue moon for wheelchair access or something. The one at the back's in perfect condition, it's hardly been used. The ones at the front of house are used all day, every day. Those sort of things have a huge impact on should you be spending money on it or not. Because personally, I wouldn't have changed the lift. I would have invested the money in something that I do know that is on its last legs. So what else have we got left? We've got our life cycle. We've got our condition. Condition, we brought up slightly in environment, but environment of a plant room is one thing, but you can also have the environment affected by its location. For example, in Oman, you find that dust very fine sand dust gets blown up and it gets in all your air conditioning equipment, it does a lot of damage in a short period of time. The life cycle reduces considerably there. This is why historically you should be looking at the data you've got in the system as well, because that'll be a telltale sign that some of this equipment needs to be moved from say 10 years down to maybe 5 or even 3 because of the environment it's being operated in. So we've got our condition, we've got our environment. Next thing is compliance. Compliance, I find, is probably one of those things that is a major reason for getting an asset survey done, because a lot of people do not know they're compliant. There's nothing wrong with it. Where the problem lies is when people will not admit they don't know. Give it to people that actually do know. We go around, we identify all the equipment, we put the maintenance regimes together for you, we identify equipment you may not even be servicing and should have done for the last 10 years. It's not for us to create an issue out of this. We're there to identify and give it to you. You've done the right thing by identifying where there are things you're unsure of, not 100% sure what maintenance should be done to it, should it be maintained, should it be compliant, blah blah blah. Give it to us, because we will turn around and go, okay, you've got no maintenance records for this, it needs to be done every 3 months, etc. In the same way, things like your compliance documents, F-gas register, your ladder register, all the bits and pieces that make up those lovely folders that you find in offices. Those need to be kept up to date, but do you know all the compliance related to them? I would say a lot of managers have no idea, and it's not because they're incompetent, it's more to do with the fact that they have not been given the right information at the right time. This is why the asset surveying helps you get things in the right direction, because we look at them. If you want them audited, we'll audit them and we'll go through and go, okay, let's have a look at this. You should be doing this every 2 months. When are you doing your water treatment? When are you checking your hoists? What equipment have you got on the roof? Do you have some window cleaning equipment, for example? Are you aware that that needs to be serviced even if it's not being used? There's a lot of things in there that you need to be aware of, and we are your eyes and ears. Now we're getting back, now we've got our list of sorts. We've got quantity of assets, the condition they're in, the life cycle. Do we need to maintain them or not? Because you potentially identified some that the client is not paying you for, so you need to take that back to the client and get some more budget. Has some stuff been removed? Because you need to give the client some back some money in that case. There's a lot of reasons that you get that asset data correct. Where things start to fall down is around now. When we give you the list and you put in your CAFM, you need to keep it up to date. If you don't, it falls behind very quickly. But on top of that, you need to make sure people that are doing it are trained in not only how to do it, but why it's important. And I think there should be more engagement with engineers, because engineers look after the equipment. They can keep you up to date with things because they serviced it this morning. When they do walk rounds, they'll go, okay, I know pump 7 is leaking, etc. And they may be able to highlight it because its servicing's due next month. Will it last till next month or not? These little things could actually be added to the assets just to keep a record of the condition, and you'll have a general condition of everything kept up to date. When you don't, what happens is an engineer turns up on site, just serviced your air conditioning units, I'll shove that in your folder, and off he goes. He'll invoice your head office, there you go, head office gets the invoice, oh, he serviced them, that's it, we'll pay him. But on that record he has put in the notebook, in your folder, it says these units 3, 7 and 9 are falling behind in condition. I've got a leak on a compressor, I've got this, parts needed, blah blah blah. But he's giving it to you, the guy on site. But some of these sites don't even have a guy on site, he's just put it in the folder. Nobody has picked up the fact that there's repairs that are outstanding. And the engineer that come out and did that maintenance may not have the connection to your office, because what happens is he has a head office, he calls up and says, I finished here, there's a list of the faults, and then that's handed in to the people on site, and then his head office go, okay, well, we'll just invoice that, because they don't have a relationship with the engineers that are with your FM company, but only have the contact with somebody in sales or purchasing, etc., and nothing to do with the paperwork. So you need to make sure that when maintenance records come in, you actually update them. If it needs these parts, can you afford them? Are they within your budget? Do you need to take them to the client for a budget? Make sure you have all that information, because it's where things fall down. And I know some people are saying, well, that's easy, that's obvious stuff. You'll be surprised how many contracts have no idea the state of some of their equipment, because somebody is servicing it, but every time they service, they leave a report that nobody is reading, and it's not up to him to fix everything. His job is to service it. His legal responsibility stopped when he made you aware of it, and he's given you it. It's just that you've never picked it up. It's in the folder where you told him to put it. It's not his job to make you read it. He's turned around and said, it's in the folder, expecting you to pick it up and read it. These are the sort of things that create issues within the industry. In the same way, when your engineer for your facilities management company does the work and identifies things, when they call up your office or close a job down, the information they give you needs to go into the CAFM. Now, dealing with help desks myself, I am aware of how many people do not do a stitch in that sense, because they have targets of shutting down so many jobs a day and all this sort of stuff. So the information looks like that at the end of the day. They've closed the job down, but there's no information. But you actually want that information going into the system to say, boiler 4 isn't firing correctly, recommend XYZ. Because that needs to be identified. That engineer may not be the engineer that comes back for the next service, but if it's on there, the next engineer gets that report coming out, he's got to go and service it, and it can say, oh, the same boiler 4 was faulted, I'll have a look at that this time. Those simple things make your asset list worthwhile. Also from a budgeting point of view, because what happens is you've got information that says this is your assets. When your client says they're all fantastic condition and your asset list comes back and says it's all 1950s, most of the stuff, if it needs changing, will be a major problem, because your light fittings are obsolete, your electrical units will need rewiring as well as just a replacement of a box, and not just a replacement of a box, sorry. So that repair goes from £150 to maybe £3,000 per unit. Those sort of things you need to be aware of, especially in an all-inclusive contract. This is why the asset list is important. Also, we identify what skills you need, because we can break down the hours between how long it takes to service an air conditioning unit through SFG20, etc. We can work out how many engineers you need on which sites, which are the sites that are going to need more maintenance than others, because every asset task is identified to its skill set. So we know if it needs a carpenter, we know if it needs a HVAC engineer, it needs an air conditioning engineer, it needs someone to service the chillers, whatever it is, it's identified as a skill set with a timetable. And then when you build them all up into a big picture, it will come out with a set of hours for each skill set, and then you can break that down into engineers, which will give you your end figure of how much your engineers will cost you. It gets you in the ballpark. I'm not saying it's going to be 100% accurate, because it can't be. Because if a generator blows up, when we surveyed it, it wasn't running. We identified it was there. We identified it was in poor condition. We identified that we recommend that it's looked at. But 3 months later, when you take the contractor over, etc., if it suddenly blew up, there's a cost involved there. These things need to be red flagged on your CAFM. are on your spreadsheets before it even gets to your CAFM to say, this is a risk, this is a risk, this is a risk. I hope this video you found useful, and I know it sounds a bit like I waffled on a bit, but I just wanted to get across the different areas of asset surveying that you may not be aware of, and why it's important to do each part. Because the compliance side of things is extremely important, because it's often where people fail. We find sites where sub-maintenance hasn't been done on compliance stuff for a decade. And you're there going, hang on a minute. You realise you haven't been doing that. Even when we're wandering around, sometimes we'll flag up stuff that is nothing to do with us, but a simple nod in the right direction. For example, I was doing a building a couple of years ago, and it'd been mothballed, put back into service, mothballed, put back into service, and then when I looked at it, I was just wandering past, and I was just checking the fire extinguishers, because I was checking whether they'd been maintained in the plant rooms, because they were the building was in quite an awkward place. They're all out of date, every single one of them. They hadn't been serviced in, I think it was 7 years. But the point is, as soon as it's identified, we just go, give you a quick call. I noticed your fire extinguishers haven't been done for a while. And I'll leave it at that, because I'm not there to get anybody in trouble. What I'm there is to say, you need to have a look at your fire extinguishers. They're no longer compliant, they're no longer legal. And within 48 hours, they'd replace them all. Simple as that. That's why it's important to get asset surveying done. We keep things safe, we keep things compliant, we keep you from being sued. Thanks for watching.